Hello everyone. Today we will learn how to create a web app using React. As a demo project, we will be recreating Cookie Clicker. The original version of Cookie Clicker was created in an afternoon, so I think we can do the same. However, the main purpose of this is to learn all of the major features that React has to offer. To start, you need to download the React plugin for your IDE, but it might come pre-installed. Next, you need to run node-v and npm-v to see if you have node and npm installed. If you don't, I'll provide a link below to install them. Next, you need to run this command right here to automatically generate a basic React app. Then, you need to navigate to the react-app directory we just created. Now you can run npm start to start up the app. If everything was done correctly, you can go to this link here in your web browser to see the basic app. If port 3000 is already in use like mine, then it will select the next available port. In React, everything is rendered from the app page. There is no URL routing like with most other frameworks. We could just throw everything in this file, but that would be messy. Instead, we'll be organizing it by embedding files within files. To start, we will define 3 files to be embedded within our main page: the cookie section, the cookie maker section, and the store section. We'll be utilizing the display flex feature a lot to get our app to look correct. If you want to learn more about it, I'll provide a link above to go in more depth. Now, we want the sections to be divided horizontally, so we will use the row flex direction. We also want the items to be aligned at the center, so we will set that as well. I am also going to set our default font size and color. Next, I'm going to add this CSS, which will operate on all the HTML code to ensure our window is displayed correctly. This overflow X hidden will prevent us from scrolling horizontally, since we don't want that feature in our project. Now, before we really begin, here's the real Cookie Clicker for reference. As you can see, we have our 3 main sections. The cookie section is the most important, so we'll start here. We will need to draw the cookie image along with the text above and below it. We will first create a CSS file to go along with this JSX file. In it, we will define the cookie section, cookie container, and cookie image. This cookie count and cookie rate we need to define in our app file, since our other sections will need to reference it. In React, we can pass variables down to children, but we can't pass the variables defined in a child up to its parent. When we define these variables, we will utilize useState. This way we can define a starting value and define a setter function which we can pass as well. It is important that we don't set the value directly, but instead we use this setter function. React is very optimized and it only updates sections that it thinks should be updated. If we don't use the setter function, it won't know the variable was updated and it won't display it correctly on screen. Now that we have those defined, we can add them to a click function which executes when we click on the cookie. In order to know if our click function is working, we need to display the cookie count and cookie rate above and below our cookie image. Now that we can click and add more cookies, we will want some indication that it is working correctly. We will want the cookie to bounce and also display a +1. To make it bounce, we will add this keyframe function to the CSS file. And we can add this animation to the cookie when the click function executes. Now, when we hover over the cookie, it gets a bit bigger, and when we click it, it bounces just like the real game. Now let's add this +1 that appears when we click on the cookie. The middle section will house our automatic cookie clickers. We will create a row for each clicker type and place one when we buy it on the store. First, we will need to find what our clickers will be in our app file. We also keep track of the counts here since they need to be updated in multiple sections of our app. We will just create the frame for now and come back to this when we add the store functionality. The z-index is important for the wood images, since this dictates what order front to back that they will appear on screen. Now, we have the container created for each cookie maker. After we add the store, we will populate these regions with cookie makers when they are bought. In the store section, we need to add the cookie makers that we can buy. We'll focus on the clickers first since they are most important. We now pass the list of our clickers from the app file and iterate over them in a loop. We will create a class for the tab to make our code more concise. This tab is composed of the background, image, and 3 text elements. It should also indicate when we are hovering over it and when it is too expensive. When we click to buy, we should update how many cookies we have left and increase the price of the clicker. We will use React's useEffect component to always be checking which background we should be using. We will also create variables above to track the different states. Next, we will add the image for this specific cookie maker and position the text correctly. Now that it is showing correctly, we need to set appropriate buy and increment values. I think these values are pretty good, so now let's go and update the rest of the app when we buy one. We also need to configure them to be clickable and execute a buy if we can afford it. We also need to update the cost of this clicker every time we buy a new one. If we just update the number of cookies based on the rate every second, it looks choppy. We want a continuous update instead. We can achieve this by dividing the number of cookies and the time by the same amount. The cookie rate would be based on the number of clickers and their increment rate. We buy from the store now, it updates cookies per second and collects cookies for us. Next, let's add a tooltip to display more information about a cookie clicker when we hover over it. We can imitate an if statement by placing a Boolean variable followed by two and symbols. We use the onMouseMove listener to set the tooltip position when the mouse moves. Below, we will create the text box that will appear only when we are hovering over the tab. I also made a slight mistake here when printing the screen. I used the single quote instead of the backtick, which caused it to not work correctly. Now, when we look at our screen, we see that it works fine for the clicker and grandma. But it's too long for the farm and factory. This is because we were anchoring to its left side. What we should be doing is anchoring its right side to the left side of the tab. With this modification, the tooltip generates correctly. Now that we have the cookie makers, we need to add them to the middle section when we buy them. I want them to form rows within their designated container, so we will need to write a function to position them correctly. We will use the use effect component again, since these images need to adjust based on the size of the window. If we just set their position when we create them, they will not display correctly when the window changes. I'm going to have this function set an array of positions which are based on their index. Then I'm going to place copies of the image at each of these positions in the return statement. Cool, so now the cookie makers render on screen. I'm going to add a few more first just to make sure it's working. Now, to make this look better, I'm going to add a color gradient for the background. I'm going to add it as a style here instead of in the CSS, so we can pass in a color variable for each cookie maker. When using CSS here, we need to put it in quotes, but we need to specify which part is JavaScript using this notation. Back in our main app file, I'm going to add a color parameter which specifies the color each cookie maker is going to have. Now, a different radial gradient is generated for each cookie maker. The only major feature left to add is the upgrade section in our store. In our main app file, we need to find an upgrade with a name, URL, cost, and a bought boolean. I'm using the same images we used before, but you can use whatever you like. I'm also going to create our upgrade tab from our cookie maker tab since they have very similar functionality. It needs to have hover and click functionality as well as a buy function. The main difference is how they are stored within a container, and they should disappear when bought. The tricky part for this feature proved to be the CSS styling. This ensures that our upgrades take up the entire vertical space of their container, and that they start on the left side so that when we buy an upgrade, they all move to the left. This also ensures the upgrades resize correctly for when we resize the window. The tooltip will be very similar, but we won't move it around like we did before. This tooltip should include the description and cost of the upgrade. And in our Cookie Maker tab, we need to adjust the total shown on the tooltip to reflect the new value. Finally, we need to implement the functionality of our upgrade. In our app file, we need to modify the cookie rate to detect if the Cookie Maker has an upgrade. To test this more easily, I'm going to set the starting cookie value really high. Now, when we go to test, we can buy the upgrades and see if they work. Now, when I hover over the cookie makers, their new rate is shown. We can also increase the mouse clicker using the clicker upgrade as well. If you go into our cookie section, we can add a few lines of code to do that. Now, after buying the clicker upgrade, my mouse click earns 2 cookies per click. Now our cookie clicker works, but it still looks a bit boring. I'm going to make this a bit more interesting by adding a video of cookies in the background. We can add a video element before displaying the pages. Since we can't return 2 HTML statements, I'm going to add what's called a fragment to wrap them together. And in the CSS file, I'm going to add the properties for the video background. Now, here's our finished product. It's not as fleshed out as the original, but has all of the main features. New cookie makers and upgrades can also easily be added by adding to the array in our main file. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.